Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Joe Dustin, the head of clinical innovation for Bristol Myers Squibb.
Guest cup.
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and we are thrilled to have you with us for another installment. It feels like I should say something about the election, but I really don't know what to say that hasn't already been covered over the last 7 days. So I'll give you a teaser. So I am in an interesting location today, and frankly, it is the first time we have had a New York Bio meeting outside of our internal offices since March. And I am down at the New York Stock Exchange, and we're doing some work in preparation for our emerging biotech company showcase that we'll be bringing to you on December 9th in partnership with the NYSE. So without further ado, and with no rehash of the election of last week, I'm going to kick it over to Derek to introduce our esteemed guest, Joe.
Sure. Well, just on the election front, Mike called it last week. There was no drama. It was really clear. All of the polls were correct. He nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. Joe, it is fantastic to have you here this morning. We have Joe Dustin, who is the head of clinical innovation at BMS. And, you know, I tend to meet a lot of people, and I remember the way that I meet some of them. And Joe and I were introduced through a mutual friend who said, you absolutely have to meet Joe. He has been on the forefront of clinical innovation for ages. This is while he was at Medidata. So Joe, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us here.
Wow, that is quite the introduction. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Great to finally we've talked about this a bit, so it's nice to be
live
with you.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, we've spent a good amount of time on these talking about really where the landscape of innovation is going and kind of the merging of digital innovation and clinical trials and a lot of what that means for patients. And, you know, we have a ton of stuff to talk about today, but why don't you give us a little bit of a background on how you got where you are?
Wow. Okay. So
we only have an hour.
Okay. So all roads lead back to a family barbecue sometime in about 2002, where it's everyone has a story of like how they get involved in their job and how they get enrolled. Like, how do you get involved in clinical research? How do you get in? Was it by accident? Did you go to school for it? For me, it was a complete accident. And I came out of college. I was going to be a Windows NT expert, guy I was an IT guy, basically.
Thank you for tuning in.
I met a guy at a family barbecue from Finland,
9 a.m.
and my mother was the landlord
from across the
in the house that she grew up in. That my grandfather dug the basement out with a shovel in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the part of Cambridge like by Mount Auburn, sort of like it's an Italian stronghold of areas where they just all went there, and my parents and aunts and uncles and whatnot, they all lived in the house, right? So like first and third floor, aunts and uncles, second floor, my mom got out and rented it. So, right. So break the cycle. But she met this couple from Finland, and they said, I was about to get out of college, and they said, we could use somebody. Why don't you come on over on Monday and interview or just talk to us or whatnot. This company was called CRF Health. Which ended up becoming Cigna Health, and sort of was the dawn of the e-diary age. And I moved in. I ended up going for an interview with the founders who were from Finland. It was like in an old doctor's office on Concord Ave in Cambridge, close to Harvard Square. And there were like 6 people. I think I was the second American in the office, and there were showers in the office. It was an old doctor's office. So I was the IT guy, and I learned Linux. They were based in Finland. I went to Finland for a week, sort of 22, single, no dependents, and first time out of the US. And so my first out of US experience was Helsinki, Finland. And I got to tell you, it was awesome. And it was the dot-com burst. None of my friends had jobs. And I fell into this job. And 6 months after I got in as the IT guy, they said, so do you want to help us build the things that we sell? And I said, sure, what's that? Well, we make these things called electronic patient diaries on Palm Pilots, and they're used in clinical trials to determine how patients feel if they're taking an experimental drug. And that data is used to get the drug approved, or part of the primary part of how to get approved. I said, okay. And that's how I got started in clinical trials. I was the IT guy turned project manager building e-diaries for global trials.
All right. So fast forward a little bit, and you've now been in this, gosh, close to 20 years. And you were at Medidata for 12, which literally, we had Glenn on a little while ago and learned a little bit about the origins of the company, but really, it's turned into basically a rocket ship. They've more or less looked at every single thing that touches on data and clinical trials, and really, became kind of dominant in that space. So what was it like to be there really through kind of the formative years of the company? Because that's really where the exponential growth happened.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. And I was on the webinar when you had Glenn on. He's amazing. He's great. And I think that the vision still holds true over there. They're just doing great work. And when I joined there in 2008, they weren't public yet. Small company, just kind of rising as people that were doing things differently. So I got to experience, I guess, what some might consider in the investment community or even in startup land, kind of a unicorn experience. Mm-hmm. Not as an executive, but as someone who kind of was on the front lines, on the technical and on the sales side, really seeing the growth. And I see when I joined it, there were 400 people. And I felt like I missed the boat, right? I was like, oh man, I missed the startup days. I joined and there was a whole week-long new hire orientation in New Jersey. They had training, they had classes. I was like, this is nothing compared to what I've ever experienced. And it was, meanwhile, all the rest of my friends are like, business analyst 2 at Cisco. And I'm just like a random startup company just going and just doing not at all what any of my other friends were doing. And
you get a lot of the what does your company do again? That kind of look with this kind of face, the scrunchy face.
What is the thing? It was a lot of that. And so when we went in, we just at Medidata is a testament to innovation and just really just trying to get stuff done. And trying to get it done better than everyone else, doing it not just the same way, not doing a me too, not settling for what's out there. And Glenn mentioned it, I think on your this event last time he was on, was we were taking this thing called the internet and just floating new technology on top of what was going to be the future of infrastructure for everything we do. And I think that that was a bet that worked. And that enabled this sort of revolution in clinical trials. I mean, when you think about it, and we were saying this back then, like the healthcare industry, the clinical trials world, life sciences, however you want to describe it, was only next up from the bottom in innovation, next to the government. and it's not a good place to be, but it is a good place if you're trying to change the world and create a lot of opportunity and make a big impact. And I think nobody will argue the fact that in healthcare, in life sciences, in research, science rules, and science always wins, as we'll see soon. But I also believe that when you think about the innovation and the technology and the just pure science in the drugs and the treatments that are putting out there in the market by various companies, all the companies that are out there now, it's amazing. And it's breakthrough, but the operational back end of how that actually is conducted is usually pretty bad. And so like operationally, they're not good. Therefore, companies, technology companies, vendors, if you will, are there to change that. And I always saw and always saw myself as a partner, as a advisor, as a keeper of knowledge to what was outside in the world versus talking to folks that were in pharma. And now being in pharma myself, I see why. And I can have a bigger respect, not only for what people are dealing with inside a pharma company dealing with technology, but also actually realizing and having many aha moments myself coming inside saying, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
And so it's hard, right? It's hard. And being part of that, as you said, meteoric rise at that time was just the right timing for a lot of things. And at Medidata, they just did a lot of things right, and they expanded at the right time. They did a lot of things wrong as well, but every company learns from that and grows. It was really
What are some of the things that you guys did right that maybe either CROs or whatever just kind of didn't see? You know, it seemed like the company was either a step ahead of everybody or was doing things that other people weren't necessarily doing. But, you know, why do you think it is that Medidata was able to kind of step in and really do what you guys did better than, I would say, most of the other, if not all of the other people in the industry?
Yeah, it's funny to like talk about it now, or it didn't seem that long ago, but it's almost like it was here like Apple talk about how did you beat out Microsoft, and then like Bill Gates and him are talking on the stage and they just laugh about it, right? I think that, I mean, listen, at the time it was Medidata and Face Forward, right? They were kind of like fighting for the gold, and Medidata won out. I would argue, but I would also say that the things they did well. You mentioned, you know, what did they get right that maybe CROs didn't? I would say CROs didn't have to lose. CROs were very much a part of the partnership. And the thing that made Medidata, to me, being there as sort of what they call a solution consultant, the frontline demo guy, if you will. The thing that really changed the game was when Medidata made the software, in a way, self-service, that CROs and pharma companies could build it themselves. That was huge. About 2006, they started a partner program, which then enabled CROs to take the software in-house. And before that, they just went to Oracle, got a bunch of custom databases, and built something, because there was nothing, right? There was no concept of software as a service. There was no concept of cloud this or whatnot, and configuration at scale like that. And that's what they did. They created a partner program. They put the training in place. They built the software so that you didn't need an army of services to do it. You could still have that if you wanted, and they gladly would provide it, but it wasn't required. And that was the key differentiator that in the time that I was there soared in growth, went public, soared again. It was the fact that it became the de facto, because now CROs, which accounted for a good portion of the business in that channel, were able to make their own offering. It was huge. And now we're seeing the same with newer technologies that are, that should follow the same path. And other companies are trying the same as well. So it's not just one company anymore, but they were able to get that done.
I mean, is it something where, you're not talking about these enormous database type projects? You're talking about mostly a clinical trial where you have these individualized projects. They can vary in scope. It's really not cookie cutter. Is that one of the reasons that, kind of the Oracles of the world didn't step into where Medidata was? Because it wasn't just this thing where they could do these enormous big, database and infrastructure projects. And it allowed Medidata to kind of operate in a place that other people weren't paying a lot of attention to.
It was very different. Yeah, there wasn't a really major digital transformation initiative or database implementation. It was much more than that. It was more. I mean, listen, it's no surprise, and I think anyone in technology, you don't need me to tell you, but one company would do well with IT folks, and another company would do well with the business folks, the bottoms up versus top down.
Yeah.
And the users were like, I need this. You understand how I work. Well, the others are just like, we're just going to put databases in. We're going to throw it into a giant deal. And, we're talking to your CFO versus your head of clinical. So it's a much different play, a much different enterprise. And that's how enterprise software works. But the meteoric rise of fundamentally changing clinical trials started not with the CIO. It started with the folks that were doing the work. Yeah. And then that's the CIO is not doing.
CIO wasn't even a thing. Nobody had a CIO.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Is that the roles have changed. But it's very much like any kind of smaller company. You win the hearts and minds of the users to really change what they're doing and do things differently and prove value as to why they're doing it. And then it gets the attention of the executives in the C-suite, and you make big moves like that. That was a major transformation as well. Was going after to not just be the EDC company, right? That was a major difference to go higher, and that was successful.
Yeah. So
we have a
yeah,
I think rhetorical question, but I'll throw it out. So for our audience anyway, it says it is amazing how the clinical side of the pharma business has adopted digital tools. But when will we finally get rid of the fax machine, Joe?
Oh, wow. Whenever I feel horrible saying this, when everyone retires, I don't know if that's really a thing, but I feel that the fax machine is there because people don't trust technology, and I don't think that trust will ever go away.
Yeah.
Look at there are countries that don't accept e-signatures,
Yeah.
right? Like, how is that a thing in 2020, going into 2021 in a pandemic? They still don't
yeah.
accept e-signatures.
Yeah. It is.
So,
I was sending some, like I had to fill out a form for a doctor's appointment, and it was like fax it back, and I'm like, what?
no, I don't have a
No.
fax machine.
I don't even
No.
know. And then I'm like looking for
same-
apps on my phone that will fax.
Right. Can I email the thing that pops out in the fax to the other side so it can go into the other side's
Yes.
e-fax system
Yeah.
to put it in? There's no actual fax machines anywhere. For some reason, they think it's more private. I don't understand.
I feel like there's an opportunity for, like, the next Flatiron Health in healthcare to literally be a thing where you email someone the document that you want to fax with the fax number that you need to fax it to, with just an army of people in the back with fax machines that will print your email and fax it to the place that it needs to be faxed to. There's a middleman healthcare business in there somewhere that can work.
There are some companies that do so electronic trial master files. Again,
Mhm.
clinical trials, not at all a service business, but like there are some companies that offer the services that they will literally scan and categorize and do all the work for your trial master files because nobody wants to do it, right?
Mhm.
I'm sure there's some way that will literally fax things for
It's there will be a way to do it. So, okay, industry-wide question now. So we've basically seen we've seen these digital toolboxes effectively, really take hold within pharma, and you know can we point to the places that it's really changed things, right? I mean, because a casual observer will look at the time it takes to develop a drug and see that in most cases we haven't really cut that down, right? So what are kind of some of the biggest places that you think some of these digital tools have made an impact?
We always talk about how it takes, $2.5 billion in 8 years to get a drug approved, and I think over the years I've seen it now that number go up. It takes $3 billion now and 10 years to get approved. But every now and then you find something that can go faster. And it's usually because FDA gives you a breakthrough designation or something gets, shoved along the process. It's not because some process or technology was made better. But I think we can point to areas where operationally we actually designed trials better. We are changing the way we engage with patients and sites and do recruitment and collect data and shorten the time for everything. Look at what happened with Pfizer recently. Pfizer announced positive phase 3 results for their COVID-19 vaccine. Amazing. I know people in those studies, and they are, we thank all those participants that are being involved now, and it's great to hear a positive result, but that was no small feat. I mean, I know people at Pfizer that were involved with that design. They pulled out all the stops to do things differently, to design trials differently, to break the rules to what was considered SOPs, right, and pull all their toolboxes out of the innovation group and more, right, to get that stuff
create
done.
Some new tools, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some things were pushed out fast, and not everything was fully functional. But when they got out to begin with, but they pushed it out in record time. They got the data at high quality. There's no risk to safety. They're monitoring everything properly, but they just shortened the way they did things. If you take those examples, like what specifically changed, or even in other companies, what's changing, the idea of protocols being decentralized or protocol design becoming more innovative and changing is part of it. As someone who's been involved in the rise of what would be considered virtual or decentralized trials in mobile health for a good part of 10, 15 years, I'm not going to say that's the thing that changed everything, but it definitely had a part. Because not only did the way we were implementing technology that put the patient at the center, that reached out to patients in new ways, that made things easier for sites to capture data, to embrace more of an e-source data capture mentality, while it's not 100% adopted, it definitely changed the way that they wrote things into protocols that fundamentally changed the 3 or 4 things after that would actually speed things along. In some cases, unknowingly, like they didn't actually realize that, oh, that would actually have that effect on getting faster patients, because they don't have to drive 2 hours to the site and we can do a virtual visit. And that's a fairly new thing too in the past 2 years. I've seen more disruption in the way we've changed things. And this is no surprise as well, due to a pandemic, in the past year than I have in the past 10. Will we shorten time to market? Yes, we will. Have we already? Yeah, in certain therapeutic areas we have. It's not a broad, widespread thing. Specifically in certain therapeutic areas where the regulatory world is more favorable, and people are willing to take more risks to change the way they do things, which then gets them not a 6-month change. It's like a 3-year change. People aren't willing to stick their neck out if it's only going to be weeks or months. When you have companies and vendors and what out there sending a gazillion emails saying, we're going to bring you increased time to value and more ROI. And I don't even know what that means now that I'm not the vendor anymore. I get so many emails that I'm just like, these are horrible. Like, I hope I was never like that. And if there's anything I can say to people is the generic emails don't work. We just delete them. They need to be specific and more into what's happening in the industry and in an area that is something you can relate to, which is the hardest part of getting people's attention, is understanding what drives them, what their initiatives are, and what they're specifically trying to attack. Because in that environment, if you find an initiative that is game changing, not only does the technology work, but then the surrounding ecosystem of what has to change as a result of the technology potentially working will always end up being the thing that stops it, unless you can do proper change management and rally the troops and get it moving. That's the part that shortens timelines. That's the part that increases value, is companies that can be more nimble to change. And that is the hardest part.
Yes. I mean, obviously you can't comment on any of the individual, projects here, but if you think about this, we have multiple vaccine trials with tens of thousands of patients in them, all basically, from a standing start, will mostly be enrolled in under a year, right? So, just from your perspective, generally, what are some of the biggest, kind of mountains people had to move to make that happen, right? I mean, then we can ask you, because you're not involved in any of them, but what are some of to give people a flavor, what are some of the bigger things that really had to change in order for this to happen, in order for anybody to have a shot at doing it?
And like specifically related to some of the COVID trials that are out there?
Yeah. We basically, there's a pandemic there, and we just figured out the sequence of this virus. We're going to get our vaccine. We're going to get our vaccine infrastructure up and rolling. It's March, and we expect to have a phase 3 trial fully enrolled with 30,000 people in it by September. So, go to it. Let me know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, right? And it's
amazing. It's unbelievable.
There's a silver lining to this pandemic, right? Don't waste a good crisis, in a way that I always feel guilty saying, but it's true. I mean, no big 5 management consulting firm could implement any strategy faster than COVID-19 did on changing the way we work.
Right.
And if I had to point to a few things, the number it's follow the money. It's absolutely follow the money, and the regulatory changes that were made quickly to allow people to change the way they do things and not have any fear of fallout or repercussions, and they weren't like devious things. They were just normal things that were always in the wall. So I'll tell you the story, and it relates to telemedicine.
Okay.
So when they changed the regulations to allow doctors to practice across state lines in the US, when they changed the ability to reimburse virtual visits at the same price as regular visits, and when they eased the regulations from IRBs to move things forward with, don't have to do formal amendments, and we can e-sign, we can do all this stuff electronically, all that changed everything. I'll give you an example from my own doctor. I live in the middle of, farm country, New Jersey, right? Hunterdon County. And they are not in the technology infrastructure at the hospital that like NYU or Stanford or anyone is, right? So they have an EMR. It's not that great. The front end of the patient portal is horrible, but it's light years from where they were, that's for sure. So my own doctor, so I've had the ability to get at my medical records for some time, but it's just a PDF file. I can't hook any technology up to it. It's useless to me. But my doctor, who herself is like, I love her because she goes in and she just like gives it to me straight and just tells me like, you know, so like straight shooter. I love that. And then uses data to try and like, you know, talk about various things that I should do. But she used telemedicine for the very first time. And why? Because she could, because it was free. You signed up for free. They shut the office down. They got paid the same. They could have been doing this for years. And as soon as that happened, everyone got on. My first telemedicine visit was her instructing me how to take stitches out of my own leg.
Oh my gosh.
And I had, I'm an idiot. I bought an ATV for the first time because, again, I mentioned before, I live in farm country, New Jersey, with lots of land behind me. And I fell down a hill, backflip thing, like flipped over me, gashed my leg, went to the ER, got stitched up 18 stitches later, and 3 days later, looking good. 10 days later, everything shuts down. You know, this is like March 13th. So this is like right at the height of like, I don't even want to go to the ER right now because it's weird, right?
Right.
And so 10 days later, she goes, you can come in, but I wouldn't recommend it because of all the things that are happening. So go get like a nail kit with scissors and tweezers, dip it in some rubbing alcohol or vodka or something, and get your phone out, and I'll walk you through it like Afghanistan style. I'm like, okay. And that's what we did. That was my very first telemedicine. I was literally taking my own stitches out with my doctor on my iPhone, saying, that looks great. Yeah, keep doing that. You're great. And the moral of the story is that the things that that will change, because your original question was, you know, how are we able to recruit that many patients and whatnot? Because all that changed. There is no going back to this, right? This will stay. Countries will adapt. I mean, I met, I took a course at Columbia University, the digital health track, you know, at the beginning of the year. And there was a woman in there I met. She was awesome. She was actually an FDA lawyer. And off the record, we were like, so tell me, like, there's no way you're just going to go back to the regulations. Like, you can't. And she said, well, the current thinking of the agency is that we are in a state of emergency in the country right now. And when we come out of a state of emergency, the regulations will revert back to, you know, something that will no longer be in these emergency states. She goes, but by then, hopefully there'll be a new place to go back to, not necessarily the old way to go back to. So they're working very hard on that right now to ensure that progress isn't lost. And they know that. I mean, not to mention just to do things differently, but also going back to what was there before doesn't make any sense in this new normal, right?
You know,
so
I
that
think
will help all of us.
Yeah. And I think if we had been if this were a pandemic, a mini-demic, right, where it was like a 3-month kind of thing, then I think it would have been much easier for the regulators to say, okay, this was an exception. We operated an emergency and now we're back to normal, a standard operating procedure. But I don't think that, given the length of the time and the expected disruptions continuing, you know, into mid next year, depending on actual rollout of vaccine, that we can go back. I think the changes will be substantial and sustained by that point.
Also makes you wonder, like, a fundamental part of human nature, like, why does it need to take a global pandemic to do what we believe was right all along, but we couldn't move mountains, we couldn't move governments, we couldn't make acts of Congress to change, we couldn't get our own colleagues or executives inside life sciences companies to just try something new. Like, innovation isn't always need to be a scary thing. It should, like, we have a thing inside. So on my team now at BMS, we have this thing. We look at innovation ideas and projects. If it's high risk, if it's high reward, but it's low risk, just do it.
Easy.
We don't need to do anything.
Yep.
If it's high risk, high reward, we may need to run some kind of a test.
Yeah.
And this is your typical innovation process, right? You run it through various stage gates to qualify if it makes sense. And then you run a small experiment, and then you figure out if you can scale it or not. And based on your hypothesis, proven out to go. But those should be quick, fast, and then be able to have a path to scale. And like I said to, I think it was Craig Lipset and I were having this conversation, and basically out of it came, innovation is change management in disguise. Change management's the hard part. Innovation's the fun part.
Right.
But change management is the part that actually gets it done. If you can get change management right, then you have a license to do more innovation, I think, successfully.
Right. It's the overcoming of institutional inertia that's the challenging part, right? You have to get, you can think it's right, it can be perfectly right, but you have to have all the people around you actually both think it's right and tell you it's okay to go do it.
And as a lawyer, sorry, the goal, like when I first started practicing law and I was doing pharmaceutical products defense work, right, we were defending cases that had already been brought. But on the clinical side, there has been a clear risk aversion, right, in the industry. The stakes are so high. But when you have lawyers and other stakeholders that their motive is get to yes rather than why we can't do something, just changing the way you look at things can really have an impact. It's how do we get to yes is the operative question.
Right. And then how do you make the lawyers feel that they're helping, as opposed to everyone always thinks they're the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's why I brought it up.
I've already had the first experience in my current organization with the lawyers, and I feel like it was almost like hazing or the indoctrination into the fraternity, where the lawyers just shut me down, and I'm like, okay, I need to learn better, and because they're part of the solution. They're trying to protect the company. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But I still came in guns a-blazing as like this makes sense. Why can't you see it?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, we learn. We all learn.
When executives say to a lobbyist, just tell the legislature, just tell them. And you're like, there's a lot more behind it than just telling people the truth about an issue. And persuasion isn't just telling someone something that you want them to hear.
Yeah. I remember vividly, basically being the BD person who was trying to get a deal done between our company and another company, and I was basically the go-between between our lawyers and their lawyers who hated each other. I was yelled at by two different sets of people, thinking the other set of people were morons, right? And I worked with one set of the people that thought the other people were terrible, but that was it. I had to basically go through people literally just yelling at me about the other people to attempt to get this done, although it did actually get done.
Hey Joe, we had
a question. You feel like they were yelling through you just to yell at the other person? Not so much.
It was an interesting time.
Hey Joe, we actually had a question. It said, you mentioned you now understand some of what was going on in pharma that you may not have appreciated when you were at Medidata. What's the one thing that surprised you, or the one aha moment that you've experienced?
That's a great question, Deirdre. So there's a couple things. When I came in, there was a couple. So first off, the first thing I realized was how many people sometimes are involved. Mm-hmm. At some companies are more matrix than others. Yeah. Ours is one of the matrix ones. And so there's many different stakeholders involved that need to be there, many of which play an important role, some of which are just spectators, right? But when you're bringing everyone along for the ride, everyone needs to be consulted. And if you forget somebody, then what happened. And so that's, again, just observing, that was in my 6-week mark, was understanding how many people need to be involved. And so there was that. And then that equates to how long it takes and how many meetings you have about the next meeting, not so much about the thing you're going to fix or the thing you're going to change. And remember, I went from many roles over the course of 18 years in the e-clinical technology industry. The last 4 were pretty much in sales. And so I went from a sales role to a not sales role. And the intensity was like, we were all there. Nobody's sitting down doing nothing, but the intensity was different. And everyone is so busy, and they're on meeting. And with a pandemic, they're all on meetings. From anyone that thinks that pharma is just doing their 9 to 4 and they're checking out and going home, and like, it must be, it's not real. Yeah. I actually thought that happened. And maybe before the pandemic, maybe, on a Friday. Yeah, sure. People are on calls from 7:30 in the morning until 6 at night, nonstop, back to back all day. And there's no time to actually get anything done. So I don't know if I may be preaching to the choir. I would think that many of you out there are probably experiencing the same thing. I hope that there's an end in sight sometime, but this is reality. So there's not a lot of time to get stuff done. So things just take longer. So that's
well,
that.
also now, I mean, trials are basically non-COVID trials are basically in rescue now, right? Everyone had to fix things to figure out how the heck do we keep doing this?
But the
so
other part
it's,
of the biggest aha moment, just to answer the question really, is I had a meeting once about changing a role in a system that I used to work a lot in, and the ramifications that changing one role would have on thousands of users. What I would say is a simple checkbox. Like, yeah, now they just do this now. It's simple. It's online cloud software. That's why it's so easy. Took months, they said. And like trainings like you wouldn't believe, and open office hours and global emails and chasing people. It was unbelievable how many things had to happen to change a simple role on how some clinical role will deal with queries. And it was unbelievable. And I was like, oh, wow, that's why whenever people in the software as a service tech world say, we're just going to send you the new update, people freak out. And I was always someone's like, you need to stay current. Also, the tech vendors need to push their stuff out so stuff doesn't break. That is still a problem, I think, in our industry. Anywhere, really, things break. But also, pharma needs to you just need to take it, because then it's going to fix bugs, it's going to fix issues, you're going to get new features, you stay current. But then when I see what happens as a result of that, most of those features get deployed, turned off, which is good. But any change is insanely hard. And I had zero appreciation really for what that really meant before coming into pharma. And so now it's ironic that I have a bit of responsibility for change management. And now I am being educated and schooled and learning from such great people that have been here for so long, some that are new also, that are really schooling me on the art of change management and and I want to find the happy medium between that, so that we can stay technologically innovative and advanced and up to date while still maintaining the stuff we have to do. But there's certain processes. The second thing I'll mention too about this process, what was like the aha, what's different, is the validation process of computer systems in clinical trials is a bit ridiculous. I see why it's necessary, but there is definitely a change from the handing the gold CD and not touching it for 3 years, and always updating software as a service releases. And I think some companies don't yet know the difference. And the processes, there are things that we're doing that don't need to be done anymore, but they're just there because that's just the way they've done it. And to change it could mean risk that they don't know what the answer is. And so they just keep doing what they're doing to stay covered. And I think that there's and I know there are people specifically in IT and whatnot that understand this. It's just a mountain. And it's not to say that people aren't doing great. They're doing amazing jobs. But the machine is against them. It always boils down to some inspection finding from 3 years ago that somebody said we vow we'll never let happen again. And it created this bolus of stuff. That's usually because people are like, well, that's just, we were told that's the way it is. And not everyone always knows why, but it always ends up coming back to something like that.
So what's your mandate at BMS now? What are kind of the big things that what are the big things that you really want to accomplish? And what are you kind of there to do?
Why am I here? So this is my first tour, my first tour of duty in pharma. Like I said before, I feel like an outsider a bit. I'm a technology geek that has been an 18-year veteran to watch the e-clinical niche in our industry rise. And now I'm the client. And so getting that experience on I guess some would say the buy side is super interesting to me, not only from a career perspective, but from really like understanding the real problems from the other side. These aha moments are awesome. They're really educational, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm bringing perspective. I think that hopefully people can appreciate. I certainly appreciate theirs. So my remit is clinical innovation and change management, and I am here to take on the ideas and potentially scale up new capabilities that don't yet exist. And this might include working with our teams. Specifically, we'll have ideas. I just got off a meeting this morning with people in Eastern Europe that had an idea for fixing the way that sites can understand a protocol, like making protocol compliance as easy as like an app in your pocket or something that tells you on this visit you need to do these things, because people screwed up because they got to go find the protocol document and decipher what happens at day 3, right?
Yeah.
And so that idea, there are some companies out there that have some functionality, but it's not really a scaled thing. We're certainly not doing that at scale internally. And so ideas like that, and funneling in ideas and creating a culture of innovation inside the company to understand we're not just doing innovation in search of so we don't have solutions in search of a problem. We have actual problems that have real solutions that are tied to ROI, tied to change, tied to reducing the workload of people, both on our side and at the sites, reducing patient burden, changing the way we innovate in various trial models, changing the way we interact with sites and patients, changing the way we do science in some cases when it relates to technology. There's all these things are on the table that are very much poignant in the industry right now, which comes down to it's e-source, it's digital twins, it's decentralized trials, it's all these types of things are in that mix. But my high level remit is to create that framework with the team and be part of the enterprise sort of digital strategy that our remit is specifically in clinical trials, specifically, and ways to make those better and faster.
And at the end of the day, it's about getting cures and treatments to patients more quickly, right?
Yeah.
And all of this builds behind something which is providing access to patients when they need it and when the drugs are available.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, is to get it there faster, safer, but also improve the experience in the clinical trial for a patient. Like, so my biggest experience base from the past has always been around the patient experience. It's always been around technology that's in the hands of a patient, whether they're in the clinic or at home. That's been where I've spent my life doing majority of the technology work, sites and patients using technology. And so I have a little bit of a bias just because of my experience, but I'm learning so much more that it goes beyond that. Even ideas that start not with a technology in mind, but start with a problem that causes various teams across the world to use spreadsheet trackers for things, and deviations go up, and time it takes to get those things resolved, and the monitoring and data management have to do extra work, and it just boils up over in these costs and time and resources that could be, in a way, kind of eliminated, and they can spend time doing other things. It's the same sales pitch that I had as a technology vendor, except now I understand why, and also understand why in some cases that the generic sales pitch does not work, because you really have to understand what the specific problem is and discover that with somebody. So I want to work with companies, big and small, that are willing to maybe change the way their stuff works, because what I'm trying to solve isn't something you may have a business case for yet, or product functionality that can do. My team is out there specifically to figure out what the new stuff is that doesn't yet exist, then help startups or more established companies to develop their software and solutions in new ways to help us give us what we need. Because we certainly don't want to build custom software. We're not in that business. Right. But most of the solutions that we end up with end up in some sort of technology solution to make clinical trials better.
It's interesting. To revert back to what you said before about what made Medidata really good is that they, basically allowed people to adapt their software for the stuff that solved their own problems. Right. The really interesting thing that you just said is like, okay, allow us to basically take a solution and develop something that's going to work for what we've already built. Right. And don't make us rebuild our entire clinical infrastructure just to use your software or your solution. And I imagine that, each biopharma company has their own, set of procedures that they've developed that, quite honestly, they don't want to take apart and rejigger just because something changed. And that's probably a lot of the challenges, because most of those systems were put in place for a reason, but they weren't all put in place the same exact way.
I should also note that there is a very much a difference in the attitude and the way, like the life cycle of how technology is adopted inside pharma. it's not just big and small companies. It's if you're insourcing or outsourcing most of your stuff. And I should say that if a company, big or small, insources more than they outsource, like they have their own monitors, they have their own data managers, they have their own teams internally, things operate much differently than if they outsource most of their stuff to CROs. And I'm not saying one is better or worse. I think it depends on the type of work that you're in, what type of therapeutic areas you're in, and how scaled or how well resourced those teams are. I can't tell if there's, I know in some cases, and I've seen this as a trend, not internally here, but in other companies, that being on the, again, technology side, seeing many different pharma companies and how they work. Those that insource their stuff, usually they're behind a bit in the technology side, as in their stuff is, they hold back versions. They don't want to take all the updates because they want more control. But they in some cases are doing more innovative things because they have more control. So it's a weird balance of they'll build things to test it out more than just giving it to a vendor and having them put it on their roadmap and take a year to get it out.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there. There's no one right or wrong way to do it. It just depends on where they are.
Yeah. Joe, we've had a couple of questions relating to sort of your internal engagement and processes. One is, how is the general lack of knowledge about innovation and technology among the ranks of the clinical team an impediment, if so, and what are you doing to address it?
That's a great question. I'm actually surprised and impressed a bit that there is not as much of a lack of knowledge of innovation as I thought. In fact, I don't know if I can say it's the majority, but there have been teams coming to us that have great ideas. And so far, in some cases, have gone to prototype stuff out on their own because they really have problems they want to help solve and they're looking for help. And so there are more engaged people here than I thought, which is great to hear. And part of my job is to increase that even more. So what am I doing to further that is part of that, building that culture of innovation, is to get people excited, get people involved, run challenges, do these, rally everyone around an idea or a set of ideas which will come next year. And, we'll spark some of those ideas and those creative sessions. In some cases, harder to do when you're virtual, but not impossible. I will say that they're also, I can't tell if it's equal, but for the amount of people that are very engaged and creative, there are others that are living in their own silo that have absolutely no idea what's happening outside their walls. I feel very humbled that a lot of folks, when I was on the other side in the technology world, I would get calls from people asking me, what are the trends in this area? What do you see? I was never the salesperson. I was the person who had visibility to all these different things in the industry that they wanted to understand what was out so they could take that back to their teams. Right. And so I would say one of the things that we should do is embrace the technology community around us and use them as resources to help us in more ways than I think we do today, because I think that can be obviously that they want to do business together, but also, there's a resource there that I think is sometimes untapped and people just immediately get shut off, but we should embrace that more as an advisory role, not so much looking at them as vendors. They're partners, right? These companies are very good at what they do. And in some cases they're doing new things that nobody else knows how to do yet. So bringing that knowledge to the different teams around the company that are just stuck in what they do all day. In some cases, they love to hear about those things. And then the next question is, I wish we could do that. And then I say, but there's a way. Come with me. And then that's
you the yellow brick road to change.
We try. Although you want to be careful to not be, and it was another wise innovation expert told me this, because you got to be careful not to be Harry Potter in this scenario, where you come waving with the wand and everyone else, the muggles, just want to stick you under the stairs. They're scared. They don't want to see it. But when you're with the wizards, everybody loves what you want to do. So there's that. That was another Craig Lipset ism, if you will.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah. And he's right. You have to be careful with scaring people with innovation versus and not also staying in your bubble of only people that love what you're doing. You have to bring yourself to the people that are uncomfortable, but do it in a different way and get them excited.
So there's a relevant question here. You had said before that, you know, the generic emails don't work, right? Don't send some random generic email with the ROI things or whatever. And we have a good question, which is, you know, how should solution providers connect with you or organizations like yours, right? How does a solution provider actually break in with the right kind of message that, you know, it gets to help solve your problem? Or how do they figure out what your problem is in the first place?
It's so hard. And I respect this so much more now. Being on the other side, my email address is out there now. Right. So I think there are very creative ways to use social media. The first meeting I had that was really good was someone that called me. They knew someone who knew somebody. And I think we talked about bourbon for like 25 minutes before we even got to anything else. And it was
thanks COVID.
It was that you always, yeah. And then you sort of have a conversation, but it's to get them on the phone, like those cold calls where I need 5 minutes of your time, that they're not interesting, but and the hardest part is to break through and get that connection. And somehow I take the Gary Vaynerchuk style of content creation and value delivery. Very much. I love what he does in digital marketing. And I think we could certainly learn something from that in our industry. Being a B2B industry versus B2C, it's different, but you always need to be providing value. Like, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, right? So I just have things I talk about, people engage, you get to know someone, and the cold call just doesn't work. But if you need to have patience. You need to, if there's someone generally that can be interesting to me with a solution, I'm more interested in what you have to say as far as your opinion in the industry, what you like, what you do, and have a conversation around there. And if you get something that maybe can help me, that's even a bonus. But the problem is, if you're just there to sell the solution, I just running out of time to talk to all those people. It has to be a bit more of a connection to understand really what your needs and wants are, to get to know you, to get to understand what can help, but also understanding it's a little bit of cyber stalking involved. Yes. And it's understanding, sorry, I'm fumbling a little bit here, but you can't understand someone's initiatives until you send the obligatory email. Can you let me know what your initiatives are for next year so we can talk about how we can provide you a service or a product that can help you do that? No. But I also want to figure out a way to give someone the ability to have that conversation. Yeah. But just coming out like that is just such a turnoff. You gotta hang out in the bar before you go take a table, right? Yeah.
So we've got a few minutes left, and I think, one of the major areas that you've really focused on is the patient experience, right? And all of virtually every company says that they are patients first, right? And within an organization like BMS, what are some of the ways that you think your company kind of is a patient first type company, or how do you do that in a larger organization? And in what ways do you do it that kind of people probably don't appreciate, right? I think there's a lot of that stuff that goes on behind the scenes that is easy to get lost in kind of larger marketing noise. And isn't necessarily appreciated by the rest of the market.
So last night I saw my very first television ad in between, election coverage for BMS drug. And it's the first time I'm like, well, hold on, rewind. And it was for, a combination therapy. It's out there right now. It was a fairly recent thing that was approved. And at the end of the ad, it says, BMS thanks there's participants that participate in clinical trials around the world. Mm-hmm. I found out later, we're the only company that does that in our ads. Mm-hmm. That's special. That's awesome, right? I think people will do that more now that we have tens of thousands of people enrolling in voluntary vaccine trials, right? Experimental vaccines. So that hopefully people will take notice of that now. But that's special. We have a whole team here now that's dealing with patient engagement, enrollment, diversity in clinical trials. It's a big initiative. They've thrown a lot of money into that right now. That is being patient-centric. It's also being patient-centric where you understand, are there things that we can do in the protocol to reduce burden while still getting the same, data, same efficacy, right? I remember years ago, was working with tools that would give protocol designers and the scientists that were involved the ability to say, well, do you know that in other, phase 2 oncology studies like yours, you're poking the patient 17 times where the average is about 7. Do you really need to do that? And this was Ken Getz published papers on this back at Tufts on, protocols getting more complex and the whole thing from the past 10 years. And most of the reactions from the scientists were, don't tell me how to design my protocol based on your benchmarks. My study's different. And the answer then, but the unbeknownst result of that data was they didn't have any idea prior.
Right.
And so the next study was like, actually, that's interesting. Let me take a look at that, and just to see, and could we reduce patient burden? Was there an index that could tell us what patient burden was in the protocol? Companies that take that to heart and actually invest money and time in figuring out what the patient burden is and ways to reduce it, ways to make the consent easier to understand using multimedia, reducing the document from 25 pages to 6, providing data back to patients at the end of a study. That is still hard to do right now. But I sure, as a data geek, would want that. And then a lay language summary that explains what the heck it means at the end. And especially if you're someone with a chronic condition or a terminal disease, to take that back to your doctor and inject that into your own care plan. A clinical trial really could be a care option, right? That's real. And then giving sites, because not every site is technologically advanced, but sites that have massive amounts of investment in technology, like the big academic research centers as a good example, let them use their own technology for the benefit of the patients. Let them use their own patient engagement app that does scheduling and does reminders and does telemedicine and does it. Why do we have to give them ours? Sites are very capable in some cases to use their own, and we should be okay with that, because it ultimately means you're being more patient-centric by making it easier.
Joe, thank you so much for joining us. This was incredibly interesting. I think it is a point of pride. Derek and I think we've talked about the patient experience on almost every one of our breakfast series webinars. And I definitely think the industry's focus is right where it should be, not just with COVID, but hopefully with all trials as we move forward. You've been an amazing guest, and we look forward to having you back again in the future. Special thanks to VWR for sponsoring our webinar today. All right, everyone, have a great day.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.